Anti-Semitism is on the rise in countries with large Jewish populations, including the United States, Britain, but mostly France. On Monday, French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal announced that attacks against French Jews increased by over 300% between 2022 and 2023. Those comments were made during a dinner sponsored by the French Jewish umbrella organization known as CRIF.
Between the October 7th attack and the end of 2023, more than 1,200 anti-Semitic incidents were reported. In just 3 months, that's 3 times more than in the whole of 2022. Today, this wave is not stopping. It's continuing to unfold. In the first 3 months of 2024, in January, February, and March, there have already been 366 anti-Semitic incidents. That's more than 4 per day, an increase of 300% compared with the first 3 months of 2023.
Now, a report commissioned by the American Jewish Committee on Anti-Semitism in France has found that anti-Semitic incidents have surged in this country, this following the October 7th attacks last year. Kathy Clifford filed this report.
The 7th of October marked the largest massacre of Jewish people since the Second World War. Since then, incidents of anti-Semitism have surged in France. This report, commissioned by the charity American Jewish Committee, found that 25% of French Jews have been the victim of an anti-Semitic incident, a verbal or physical attack, a figure which rises to 37% when it comes to under 25s. Schools and universities are the most common location for these incidents. For 6 in 10 victims, the insults, threats or physical attacks took place on school grounds. Anti-Semitic sentiment has also been spreading within universities. 43% of 25 to 34-year-olds were found to be receptive to these ideas, with young people less aware of the Holocaust than older generations. According to the study, 10% of French people are anti-Semitic and 6% express sympathy for Hamas. Some 86% of French Jews live in fear of being attacked since October 7th.
We can now bring in Simone Rodan-Benzaquen, Director of the American Jewish Committee in Europe. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program today. Tell us more about where exactly we're seeing the spike in anti-Semitic incidents.
So, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. You said it all in your report, really. First of all, we see it across the country. We see it across the country, in particular since October 7th. We have really seen an explosion of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic acts since October 7th. Let me just add also that in terms of the acts, we know that this started in the week of October 7th, meaning before anything happened in retaliation by Israel or against the attacks of Hamas. It is happening also in particular in schools and in particular in university, which is particularly concerning because this is, of course, the new generation, and it creates an environment where young people in particular, school children as well, are afraid, where parents are afraid, they're changing their behavior, they are thinking about whether they can actually send their kids to school. University students are asking themselves whether they can continue to enroll in university, whether they can continue to come into class, and it creates an environment of fear and worry for the Jewish population. It's obviously extremely dangerous for society as a whole.
So what are school authorities doing to combat this spike?
So the schools are trying to enforce rules and punish students when things are happening. This is in particular the case in colleges and high schools. It becomes more complicated in universities, as we have seen over the past weeks at Sciences Po and any other universities across the country. We have seen Jewish students being intimidated and a relatively hesitation, let me put it that way, by student administration. Again, this is what we're seeing here in France, and we're seeing it even worse, obviously, on the other side of the Atlantic in the United States, where university campuses have even been worse, and where Jewish students are basically being attacked, intimidated on a very daily basis.
I want to talk about the protests on college campuses in just a bit, but I want to talk about here in France, because obviously we heard that from the Prime Minister, and there's some sort sort of acknowledgement that this is a problem. What is the government doing to make Jews in this country feel safe?
So, first of all, the words, of course, matter. And politics, words always matter. And the Prime Minister's words last night at the Crieff dinner were extremely important, acknowledging the problem, making sure that that there will be firmness going forward. But at the same time, there are more acts needed. One of the things that we have found in our survey is that anti-Semitism linked to the hatred of Israel is really sort of the blind spot. People know how to recognize anti-Semitism when it is far-right anti-Semitism, when it was historical anti-Semitism. They have much more difficulties in recognizing anti-Semitism when it is linked to the hatred of Israel. And there is really a blind spot because schools don't really teach their students anything about how to address this. This new form of anti-Semitism throughout history has always changed its face. It's never stayed static. It used to be religious anti-Semitism. It then became racial anti-Semitism. And today it disguises itself against anti-Zionism or a criticism, so-called criticism of Israel. But it very clearly crosses the border when Jewish students are fearful, are being attacked, and are being intimidated.
Now, Simone, I'm no expert in Judaism, so please, I'm playing devil's advocate. Correct me if I'm wrong. But in 2019, France adopted a law linking anti-Semitism to anti-Zionism. French President Emmanuel Macron even says he believes anti-Zionism represents one of the current forms of anti-Semitism, given that we are seeing this, these pro-Palestinian protests taking place across U.S. campuses here in France, Sciences Po, as you mentioned. Can the anti-Israel sentiment be conflated with anti-Semitism?
So first of all, I think it's very important that the president expressed those words back in 2008, and he was also not the first one. Before him, Prime Minister Manuel Valls had already said the same things. France also adopted what is called the working definition of anti-Semitism, which specifically gives examples on when the criticism, the legitimate criticism of the state of Israel or the government of Israel crosses the border and becomes something else. When Jews are being held responsible for actions, either imaginatory or real actions of the Israeli government, that becomes the problem. When Israel's right to exist is being questioned and undermined, that becomes anti-Semitism. So the problem is that the words are very important, but it's not being put into action. And knowing how problematic it is in schools, there needs to be much more done in terms of education to educate young people, children from a very young age on, how to recognize that form of anti-Semitism. As I said, anti-Semitism is changing its face. It isn't only neo-Nazi anti-Semitism anymore. It is hiding behind a form of anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism, but that goes far beyond just the simple criticism of Israel. So this is where the problem lies, and there needs to be a clear and formulated and strong policy on how to address the issue.
Hopefully those come into place. Simone Rodan-Benzaquen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you.